Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hi, Rob Tawab La Atham, Za'achikam Yawam Chagador Charlotte, which is good evening. This is your brother Yawam from the GMS camp in Charlotte. Nachamatam Kaya, Hamlakatha Shamayim Kwara, repent ye for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Call Halayim La La Abanaw Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rachak Wadashwa Mashana La Zaquim Nawa, Wamalakim Shor Chagador, to all praises to our Father Yahweh, which means he exists. Bahasham, and the name Yahweh Shai delivers in double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. This is Isaiah, Yeshaya chapter 14, and we'll get verse 1. And it says, "For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land, and the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Ya'ikwa." All right, reading it again. It says, "For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel." Because the Lord only deals with the nation of Yasha'Allah, which represents you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, West Indians, Haitians, and Israelite foreigners. All right, let me get a couple precepts. This is Psalms Tahoyam chapter 148 and verse 14. And it says, "He also exalted the horn of his people, the praise of all his saints, even of the children of Israel, a people near unto him. Praise ye the Lord, Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai." So ultimately, the saints, all right, is going into the children of Israel, which represents you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, West Indians, Haitians, and Israelite foreigners, all right, but ultimately going into, the elect on this side first and foremost, all right. So I'm gonna get another one. This is Psalms chapter 147. We'll get verse 19, and it says, "He sheweth his word unto Jacob, his statutes and his judgments unto Israel. He hath not dealt so with any nation, and as for his judgments, they have not known them. Praise ye the Lord." All right, so ultimately, the Lord isn't dealing with any other nation. All right, only the nation of Yasha'Allah. All right, so let's get one more. We'll get Amos chapter 3, and we'll get verse 1. And it says, "Hear this word that the Lord hath spoken against you, O children of Israel, against the whole family which I brought up from the land of Egypt," saying, because going back into ancient Egypt, all right, ultimately it was the Israelites that was delivered, from Egypt. All right. And in these times, ultimately, we derive from our forefathers, so, that was us being delivered, in the, in another lifetime, but ultimately, in these times, as the scriptures go into, the spirit itself beareth witness that we are the children of the Most High, roughly paraphrasing, so it's his word that resonates with our spirit, you see, because we're in Egypt again. All right, this is Egypt 2.0, all right, talking about America, Babylon the Great. All right, but reading it again, it says, hear this word that the Lord hath spoken against you, O children of Israel. All right, it says, "Against the whole family which I brought up from the land of Egypt, saying, you only have I known of all the families of the earth. Therefore I will punish you for all your iniquities." And the law was only given unto the nation of Yasha'Allah. So therefore, we sinned, we went off, or we broke the law, statutes, and commandments. So therefore the Lord placed us into captivity. All right, in which again, we're in captivity again in America, Babylon the Great. You see, but in this time, the Lord ultimately is delivering the elect. All right, whereas in the ancient world, all right, it was the whole nation of Yasha'Allah. All right, and this time it's going to be the elect that's going to be delivered. All right, so going back to Isaiah chapter 14, we'll get verse 1 again. It says, "For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel," because the Lord is only dealing with, the nation of Israel. All right, we've been punished for our, our iniquities, so again, we fit the scriptures and the prophecies as pursuant to, what would happen to the children of Israel. Are you so-called Negroes, Latinos, Native Americans, West Indians, Haitians, and Israelite foreigners? We fit the holy people of the scriptures. So it says, "And set them in their own land." All right, I'm gonna get a quick precept. This is Genesis chapter 15, and we'll get verse 18. And it says, "In the same day," it says, "In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates." So that land known as the so-called Fertile Crescent, all right, that land ultimately belongs into us, all right, in which the Lord is going to place us back into that land. All right, that's the best that's the best land on the planet Earth. All right. So going back to Isaiah 14 and verse 1, it says, "And set them in their own land." All right, talking about the so-called Fertile Crescent. And the stranger shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Yaiqua. All right, let's get a quick precept. This is we get two. This is Isaiah chapter 56. All right, going into the strangers. All right, Isaiah 56 and verse 6. It says, also the sons of the stranger that joined themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it and taketh hold of my covenant. All right, let's get another precept. This is Romans chapter 9, and we'll get verse 4. And it says, who are Israelites, reading down from verse 3. Well, I'll read it down from verse 1. It says, I say the truth in Hamashayach. I lie not, my conscience also bearing me witness in the Holy Spirit, that I have great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart. For I could wish that myself were accursed from Hamashayach, from my kinsmen, from my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory and the covenants and the giving of the law and the service of the Most High and the promises. Now going back to Isaiah, the 56th chapter and the 6th verse, and it says, also the sons of the stranger that join themselves to the Lord to serve him and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants, everyone that keepeth the Sabbath from polluting it and taketh hold of my covenant. So only the Israelites can serve the Lord. The Israelites ultimately have, the service of the Most High, So going into and specifically the elect on this side. But let's get this too. This is Genesis chapter 22, and we'll get verse 17. And it says that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies, and in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. All right, in which the Lord was speaking unto Abraham, which Abram was surnamed Abraham, you see, but again, the Lord ultimately was going into verse 18. It says, and in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. So ultimately going into the nation of Yashar Allah. All right, but the part where it says, and in thy seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed, because Jacob's going to be coming out of every nation on the planet Earth. Going into the Israelite foreigners. Which pretty much Abraham was a foreshadowing of the Israelite foreigners. All right. But going back to Isaiah, the 14th chapter and verse 1, and it says, for the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will yet choose Israel and set them in their own land, in which, we got Genesis 15 and 18 for that. It says, and the stranger shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Yaiqua. All right, the strangers going into the Israelite foreigners. Verse 2, it says, and the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids, and they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. All right. So let's get a quick precept. This is Revelation chapter 13, and we'll get verse 9. And it says, if any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. All right. So when we go into it says, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. All right, I'm gonna get this quick precept real fast. This is Joel chapter 3, and we'll get verse 2 or verse 1, and it says, hold on, verse 6. It says, the children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border. All right, when you go into this word for Grecians, all right, this goes into Yawanya, which goes into, it says a descendant of Yawan, or it says Javan right here. All right, but ultimately this is going into, the Greeks, the so-called Greeks, because the first Greeks was Japhites, but being that Esau, Edom pretty much, took those lands, they pretty much subscribed, to, the traditions and stuff like that in that specific area, but the Grecians right here in this verse is going into, the Greeks, all right, the Edomites, all right, the Edomites, but, they essentially placed us into captivity, in that time, all right, the Greeks, all right, the Romans, All right, and then coming into America, Babylon the Great, which also is, spiritual Rome, spiritual Nineveh, spiritual. It can be likened unto Greece, being that in Greece it was Hellenization, you see, but Hellenization is just going on currently, which is Westernization, pretty much just Hellenization 2.0. All right, so they Esau Edom has to ultimately pay for that. How the scriptures go into the Lord required that which is past. All right, so going back to Revelation chapter 13 and verse 9, and it says, verse 10, it says, "He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword," in which Esau, Edom, the so-called white man, going back into Genesis, he was blessed with the sword. And, when you look at, different, Edomites and just in history, Cristobal Colon, Christopher Columbus, he said he couldn't put the sword down, and they all come in that same spirit. They all pretty much, they love the sword. That's their blessing, so he's going to be essentially, put to death, It says, "He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword." After his, 1,000 years of slavery, he's going to be destroyed, It says, here's the patience and the faith of the saints. This is ultimately what we're waiting for. And ultimately right now in these times, all right, we're seeing the prophecies and everything take place, and we're seeing the downfall of our enemies, So I'm going to go ahead and get that, and I'm going to close. But this is Proverbs chapter 29, and we'll get verse 16, and it says, "When the wicked are multiplied, transgression increaseth." All right. When the wicked is multiplied, in seed and also in philosophy, it says, when the wicked are multiplied, transgression increaseth. All right. Their lifestyles, all right, democracy, all right, how they live, scriptures say their tongue walketh through the earth, so people pretty much subscribe to, how they get down. That's why it says transgression increaseth, you see, because people start to take on the ways of Esau Edom, all right, in which he was made adverse to the scriptures as pursuant to Psalms, the 10th chapter. But it says, when the wicked are multiplied, transgression increaseth, but the righteous shall see their fall. And we're seeing their fall. Essentially, America, Babylon the Great is going down. All right, and ultimately, we got next. Esau's going to serve his 1,000 years of slavery. All right, as with the heathen. All right, but the other heathens ultimately going to get their own lands and stuff like that. But Esau Edom is going to be destroyed. I'm gonna get one more and that'll be it. But this is the Hoyam Psalms chapter 75, and we'll get verse 7. It says, "But the Most High," verse 6 is verse 5. It says, lift not up your horn on high, speak not with a stiff neck, for promotion cometh neither from the east nor the west, nor from the south, but the Most High is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another." That's what we're in the process of. That's what's taking place right now. It says, but the Most High is the judge. He putteth down one and setteth up another. For in the hand of the Lord there is a cup, and the wine is red, it is full of mixture. And he poureth out the same, but the dregs thereof, which the dregs goes into the part that's, the strongest part, that's the part nobody want to, pretty much drink. It says, but the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth shall wring them out and drink them. So the dregs are that ultimately represent symbolically slavery, or having the curses placed upon them. Deuteronomy 30 and 7. We're seeing the curses fall upon our enemies. You see, but in the kingdom, they're ultimately they're going to succumb to the curses. It says, but the dregs thereof, all the wicked of the earth shall wring them out and drink them. So first and foremost, Esau Edom, he's going to go back to his natural state, the basis of men, and so on and so forth. With the rest of the heathen, you see, but Esau is going to get the bare brunt of his punishment. He's gonna have it the worst. He's gonna be the basis of men. All right, and which the heathen gonna be back in they rightful place, which they don't really want that to happen. That's why they ultimately came up with that conspiracy. Psalms the 83rd chapter, Psalms the 2nd chapter. You see, but ultimately they're gonna be set back into their rightful estate. Because the Lord ultimately is pretty much restoring the judges as at the first. All right, and then also Isaiah the 26th chapter, the 9th verse. All right, pretty much going into righteousness. The earth is gonna be ran in righteousness, and everything gonna be balanced. Everything gonna be back in order. So just wanted to go into that. I don't want to that was a beautiful edification to the spirit. Wa Adorantaza Atam Yesh Laila Tawab Lord as well. You have a good night. Wa Shalom Lakam, which is peace into you all. Shalom, shalom.